It's April the 15th, 2021, and we're in Judges chapter 12 this morning. The men of Ephraim called out their forces, crossed over to Zaphon, and said to Jephthah, "Why did you go to fight the Ammonites without calling us to go with you? We're going to burn down your house over your head." Jephthah answered, "I and my people were engaged in a great struggle with the Ammonites, and although I called, you didn't save me out of their hands. When I saw that you wouldn't help, I took my life in my hands and crossed over to fight the Ammonites, and the Lord gave me the victory over them. Now why have you come up today to fight me?" Jephthah then called together the men of Gilead and fought against Ephraim. The Gileadites struck them down because the Ephraimites had said, "You Gileadites are renegades from Ephraim and Manasseh." The Gileadites captured the fords of the Jordan leading to Ephraim, and whenever a survivor of Ephraim said, "Let me cross over," the men of Gilead asked him, "Are you an Ephraimite?" If he replied no, they said, "All right, say Shibboleth." If he said Sibboleth, because he could not pronounce the word correctly, they seized him and killed him at the fords of the Jordan. 42,000 Ephraimites were killed at that time. Jephthah led Israel for 6 years. Then Jephthah the Gileadite died and was buried in a town in Gilead. After him, Ibzan of Bethlehem led Israel. He had 30 sons and 30 daughters. He gave his daughters away in marriage to those outside his clan, and for his sons he brought in 30 young women as wives from outside his clan. Ibzan led Israel for 7 years. Then Ibzan died and was buried in Bethlehem. After him, Elon the Zebulunite led Israel for 10 years. Then Elon died and was buried in Ajalon in the land of Zebulun. After him, Abdon, son of Hillel from Pirathon, led Israel. He had 40 sons and 40 grandsons who rode on 70 donkeys. He led Israel for 8 years. Then Abdon, son of Hillel, died and was buried at Pirathon in Ephraim, in the hill country of the Amalekites. Amen. Well, straight away in this chapter, we have the Ephraimites doing again what they have done before. We saw this with Gideon in verse 1 of chapter 8. And what is that? Bringing a confrontation. Again, this is within the people of God against the leadership ordained by God. All the way along, these men of Ephraim have been a thorn in the side of God's appointed leaders. Here is a group who seem to be touchy, argumentative, rebellious, and downright dangerous. Look at the end of verse 1. I mean, that's chilling. Really, I think here's the point. They thought they should be in control. And this underprivileged outsider from a lower social class, this man Jephthah, he certainly shouldn't be. They should be. I have to say, in almost every church I've ever been in, I've found people like this. They are an absolute pain. And my friends, I hope you will never be in this category. Well, Jephthah knows how to deal with them. Certainly initially he deals with them with great patience and skill. So the initial confrontation leads verses 2 to 3 to the explanation. He argues the justice of his cause, why he did what he did, and he's very reasonable and he's very fair in what he says. But I think inevitably, again, because of the hostility, the confrontational negativity of the men of Ephraim, inevitably no amount of explanation will satisfy them. Very quickly now, the whole thing leads to an escalation, verses 4 to 6. So confrontation, explanation, escalation, full-blown civil war. Now we have that famous word, don't we, in verse 6, shibboleth. It's interesting, the original context in which it's found, a pronunciation test between two warring factions. Now that word has passed into the English language. Look it up in your dictionary sometime, and you'll find it there. It's taken on a slightly different meaning from what we have here in the Bible, but that's a fascinating little point there. But the main point of all of this, of course, is the terrible civil war that is taking place now amongst the people of God. End of that verse 6. 42,000 Ephraimites were killed at that time. And then finally, verse 7, we have the conclusion of Jephthah's judgeship. He ends his life, he ends his ministry, actually, in a surprisingly strong way, certainly compared with some of the folly and weakness that we've seen before. But don't forget, from chapter 11, verse 1, he was a mighty warrior. Then we have a handful of very obscure judges. There's Ibzan, verses 8 to 10. There's Elon, verses 11 to 12. There's Abdon, verses 13 to 15. Now, there's some nice quirky detail here, such as the number of the donkeys that they had. I rather like those details. Sort of eyewitness, historical, just to remind us that this is real history. These aren't myths and legends made up centuries later. People were there taking the notes, noting down the numbers. That's why the numbers are so important in the Bible. The chronology, the geography, the history. This is real history. But having said all of that, who's ever heard of, and I've almost forgotten already their names, Ibzan, Elon, Abdon? Yet, here they are, recorded, written down, and honored eternally by being in the Bible. I'm reminded of Philippians chapter 4 and verse 3, where it says, "Yes, and I ask you, loyal yokefellow, help these women who have contended at my side in the cause of the gospel, along with Clement and the rest of my fellow workers whose names are in the book of life." Even here, these people, they've been made famous because they are in the Bible. Euodia, Syntyche, this man Clement. But we know hardly anything about them. Again, fairly obscure. And then there's the reference to the rest of my fellow workers. They're not even named. We don't even know who they are. How obscure is that? People not known to us at all, but absolutely known to God, commended, rewarded by him for faithful service, whose names are in the book of life. Is yours? Is my name written in the book of life?